Welcome back to American Arms Channel, ladies and gentlemen. As you can tell by the title of the video, as well as there being two very long boy 10 gauges on the table, today we are taking a look at the Ithaca Mag-10, or for all intents and purposes, the Remington SP-10 versus the Browning Gold 10. Now, both variants are semi-automatic, gas-operated, tilting bolt, lock-breeched, 10 gauge, 3.5-inch Magnum shotguns. Okay, here, take a breath after that long statement. Really, when you're looking at these two, there are a number of variants. However, what I have on the table here are fairly representative of what you will find most commonly. Now, if you are substituting a more modern, quote-unquote, Remington SP-10 for a Mag-10, you will have the advantages that it will, like the Gold 10, also have a threaded barrel. You'll find them typically in 26 or 28-inch barrel lengths, although there were a lot of 30-inchers produced as well. And it does have some mechanical updates that do not make it identical to the Ithaca Mag-10. However, form and function is pretty much the same. Now, the Browning Gold 10 here was released with a steel receiver. This is an alloy or aluminum variant. It is the field or light model. This one has a 28-inch barrel. This Ithaca Mag-10, while I'm unsure on the actual production date, is most likely an early 80s production. It is a mid-production. While the Gold 10 was introduced in 1993, the original bad boy semi-automatic 10 gauge is the Mag-10, and that was introduced in about 1973 or 1974. So, predating the Gold 10 series and the SP-10 series by about 20 years. So, when we're looking at the two, obviously right off the bat we can tell all your Mag-10s are going to have wood stocks, whereas your Gold 10s, majority of them are going to have a synthetic stock. Although there are a number of wood-stocked variants out there that were made with the steel receiver. The steel receiver was made from around 1993 to 2000, 2001-ish. I'm not super clear on the dates, but right around that period they transitioned to the light model only because of complaints that the 10 gauge was too heavy. However, that is something that is going to be of note when comparing and contrasting these two, as a Gold with a steel receiver, while slightly more trim, not terribly noticeable, but slightly more trim, is going to have very close weight to the Ithaca Mag-10. And the original Mag-10s with no modifications are very much heavier than your more modernized Gold series. Now, the SP-10 has a lot of synthetic stock variants out there. You could theoretically modify a fore-end from an SP-10, and I think the buttstocks will slip right onto a Mag-10. Maybe some modification may be required of them, but very, very close, and you can get that trimmed out with synthetic furniture. So yes, you can lighten up the Ithaca Mag-10, but in my point of view, why do it? And that's going to lead right in to this next comment. The Mag-10 is an incredibly smooth shooting gun. A well-tuned or well-broken-in Mag-10 is very smooth. Very, very smooth. Whereas a Gold 10, when broken in, is smooth, but it has a very violent action and a very harsh action. And you can definitely tell a difference shooting these two back to back. So, wow. Our Mag-10 is actually proving how hefty it is because it is crushing its empty shot shell stand. So we're just gonna save that one. Oh, maybe we haven't saved that one. Oh well. There goes a good Remington hull. We'll fix her. But between the two, you know, your main differences are going to be weight and shooting experience. So, while I will state right now that the Gold 10 series is objectively a better shotgun, I will say that subjectively, I would not feel worse for wear, for a waterfowl piece at least, to be utilizing a Mag-10 or Remington SP-10, simply from the shooting characteristics. Now, is the Gold 10 a stronger action? Yes. Can it hold more? Yes. When, comes snow goose season, can you put a magazine tube extension on it? Yes. Are parts available? Yes, kind of ish. Depends upon when a production run's been out, but common wear components, springs, upgrades, etc., they're available for the Gold Series. Not so much for the Mag-10 and SP-10, although springs are available. The main components that you may see failures on are not readily available with the SP-10 Mag-10. Choke tube system. The Browning Invector 10 choke tube system is very common, and it's still in production. It's hard to find Ithaca choke tubes, and they were made. They were made for the 10 gauge, and it's very challenging, but not super hard, but it is challenging to find a lot of good options for the Remington SP-10. The coveted Terror tube, which every 10 gauge fan seems to talk about and is equipped in this gold right now. They made it for the SP-10. SRM Industries made it for the SP-10, but you're not going to find one brand new. They will still make them for the Gold Invector series. They do batches of them. However, you're not going to find it for the SP-10 series. So if that's what you're doing, that's going to be a problem out there. But in their standard guise, the Gold 10 is objectively a better gun than the Mag-10, but the shooting experience is so much sweeter and so much smoother on the Mag-10 that I would not feel at a disadvantage in the goose pit or the duck blind if that is what you so choose, and in the deer woods. I mean, if you're shooting slugs, buck, whatever it may be, at whitetail, the Mag-10, even though it only holds 3 shots total, is definitely a good option. And the Gold 10, you can put an extension tube on, so 9+1 versus 2+1. It's an either or sort of situation. There is no leveling the playing field when it comes to capacity and firepower. But both are Magnum 10 gauges and both can handle substantial loads. Let's take a look at the insides of these two guns, see how they tick, and wrap up some final thoughts, because I know guys, they're always asking me, well, what's the better semi-automatic 10 gauge? Should I go with the SP-10 or Mag-10, or should I go with the Gold 10? And until I had experience with the Mag-10, I couldn't confirm, but the short of it is the Gold 10 is a better gun. The Mag-10 is a better shooter. Now, we've got the handguards off, and before I tear the bolts and trigger packs out of both of these shotguns, one thing I wanted to take a look at was the gas operating system while assembled on the shotgun. Now, this one, there we go. The barrel came off a little bit because the handguard's not on, but as we can see here, we have a sleeve, and there are piston rods, transfer bar rods on either side of the sleeve. Up here, there's a free-floating piston, and as we can see here, as the piston travels rearward, it unlocks the bolt drops out of its locking recess, and inertia takes over and sends the bolt all the way to the rear, either to lock open on an empty magazine or to pick up a new round from the lifter and chamber it. So it is a very simple system, but you can see this big block and very small post here is limiting the capacity of the shotgun. But when you're considering simply making sure that you're able to cycle and you're trying to balance out the shotgun, not have it too front heavy, and its purpose is as a waterfowling piece first and foremost, with US law we're limited to 3 shots anyway. So the design is not a bad one, and if Remington or another company were to still produce an Ithaca Mag-10 base design like the SP-10 today, there could be some upgrades, and this system could probably be adapted to be very similar to the Gold system, which we'll look at here in just a second. But it's not inherently a bad design, it just limits capacity. But again, if we're looking in the realm of, if we're looking at through the lens or context of being a waterfowl piece first and foremost, it's acceptable, it's fine. But you lose the ability to add magazine tube extensions, you have limited capacity for deer hunting, so on and so forth when it comes to arguments for greater capacity. The tube is half that of the Gold Series, but you can also see here the Gold Series has a lot of fore-end space, because when you line these two side by side, they, from butt to front of receiver, are about the same. In fact, if you were to block off everything, you'd say, well, those are two fairly similar guns. And really, they are in operating principle. But again, this system is very smooth. It is very efficient. Well done, especially for 1974 technology. Now we fast forward 20 years to the Gold Series, and what are we looking at? Well, pretty much the same thing. We have a piston rod, but now the piston itself is on the rod sleeve, and we have a single operating rod with a return spring on it. Our bolt design has changed as well. It is now a Super X Series bolt design, but the principle remains the same. Gas is tapped off, the piston flies back, inertia takes over. But it is a more violent system, and it is not as well balanced as the Mag-10 SP10 series. Looking at the barrels here, we can see that the Gold Series has a very simple barrel ring, and you guys can't really see this, but there are two gas ports up inside the barrel ring. It's a pretty big barrel ring because it has to slip over that pretty big magazine tube. Now, when we look at the Mag-10, we see, okay, we have a floating piston here with a C-clip, a retaining ring, which is very easy to remove, but is very secure. And when assembled, you're not really worried about that piston popping that off. You have a castle nut style retention for the gas system. And essentially this was tuned from the factory to port the proper amount of gas. So if your gun's working right, don't touch it. Don't play with it. It'll be just fine. It can stay just like that. And it has slight bleed off. But really, what you're doing here with this piston is you have this gas is coming down into this cylinder. And on the underside of this piston cup, it releases and increases the gas volume. Once it's all the way out, it breaks that seal and blows the gas forward. So it's a very violent, quick, almost like a tap-it gas system. Whereas with the Gold 10, I have to pick up the receiver here, we're looking at a essentially long stroke piston rod, except it's not attached to the bolt carrier group. It is using a piston rod on the piston itself to impinge upon the bolt carrier and operate the action. You do have to seal the action with a split ring here. It's kind of like a little top hat, an upside down top hat. And you do have two gas rings that guys who like to play with AR-10s and AR-15s are going to recognize. Those piston rings can line up. That's not going to affect function. There's some guys that worry about that because when these are in place and gas pressure is pushing against them, the gaps seal and open the action. So, two ways of getting it done, but both are efficient. However, this one is a little bit more violent, whereas this one is very quick and extremely efficient, to be honest. So before we get into this, one thing I do want to note about the Mag-10 and SP10 series, the action spring comes out of the front of the action spring tube when you remove the bolt carrier from the receiver. So the bolt carrier itself actually has a two-piece tail, which is very different for most people who've ever looked at a semi-automatic shotgun's innards. Kind of throws you off. Essentially, think of this as a non-captured buffer and spring guide for the shotgun. It definitely affords the user a lot easier access to that area. Now, that doesn't always mean that past owners with SP10s or Remington Mag-10s have taken care of it. This spring is a testament to that, and I'm just absolutely filthy because it's got oil and it's still got some mung and rust coming off of it. We are replacing this spring for this shotgun at some point in the future. However, I do want to note that. Also of note is that the SP10 and Mag-10 series will have a nylon buffer on the bolt itself, whereas the Gold 10 series utilizes a metal contact plate for the back of the bolt. And you can see a little bit of wear there from that hitting, and a hard rubber buffer behind it, and that requires you to disassemble the stock to access it and replace it. So give and take on which way you want to execute it, but just putting that out there. Now, as far as trigger groups go, both are two ways of accomplishing the same exact thing. If we look at them both, we can see that, okay, the profile is a little bit longer on the Gold series. The hammer is heavier on the Gold series than the Mag-10, but the Mag-10 uses a little bit more traditional semi-automatic trigger group setup, whereas the Gold series uses more of an elongated linkage style. But for all intents and purposes, there's not a whole lot of functional difference, although the designs do differ significantly. But both are easy to clean out, both are easy to maintain, and both utilize round wire and basically wire springs for springing. Now, the meat and potatoes of looking at the difference between these two shotguns is the heart of the bolt. We can see here, well, this looks a lot like a Super X action because that's what it is. It is a Super X bolt carrier and bolt system. You can see we have a nice short tail for how long of an action it is. But, you know, it's a pretty good setup. It's very, very strong. You have a solid bolt here with good lockup, but it's still only 1 point of lockup, and it still is a tilting breech lockup and not a rotating bolt. So there is something to argue there for an even stronger action would be perhaps a 2 or 3 lug rotating bolt. But this is pretty stinking strong and does its job. We have some lightning cuts here on the top of the bolt and side of the bolt. And we can also see on the bottom of the bolt our control round feed tab akin to that of a Gold 10. The nice thing is that tab is actually depressible on the Gold series, the Gold 10 series, so you can unload the magazine tube without having to cycle them through the action. Now, on the Mag-10, we see that we have a fairly standard looking, almost 1100, Remington 1100-ish bolt here, and we have a carrier. Here is our charging handle. It just slips right in and out, and it is a friction fit. And the bolt itself, when assembled in the action, is what keeps that charging handle in place. So these things being wiggly is normal. Don't worry about it. But we can see we have a very, compared to the Gold series, very insignificant carrier with most of the mass coming from the linkages here. And it is a dual leg linkage. We'll just bend it over like that. It's kind of a funny looking thing there. So when people say, oh, the Mag-10 SP10 is complicated, no, field strip involves 2 more parts than a Gold 10. It's not that complicated, but it is kind of funky. And it does take a little bit of finesse to reassemble. However, it works. The nice thing is, unlike the Gold series, the nylon buffer is accessible just through field strip and can be replaced with a punch of a pin. That is also a dual purpose pin that holds in your firing pin spring. So this whole assembly will come out the back. And once again, being efficient, which means it's less complicated technically than the Gold 10 series with a pin and an independent spring and an extractor. The extractor here is not quite as large of a profile as the Gold series, but it's got a very sharp edge to it, very good for grabbing those hull bases. And the firing pin spring is actually the extractor spring. Not uncommon for shotguns, for shotgun designs to dual purpose that spring, but definitely a cool little deal there. Before we move on to final talking points here, I mentioned just a second ago that they're really not much more complicated and there's not that many more parts when field stripped. So here with the Mag-10, you know, without having the receiver barrel and forearm in the picture, which counts for 3 parts, and remember, your piston system is assembled onto your barrel and doesn't really require a lot of maintenance. You know, maybe pop that piston off every once 500 rounds or so many 100 rounds or at the end of the hunting season and just wipe her down and put her right back on. But in total, you're looking at Let's see. So there's 3 that are not in the picture right now, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you've got a total of 12 field strip components. All right, well, how much does the Gold 10 have? Let's see here. Again, with 3 not being in the picture, being the forearm, barrel, and receiver assembly. So the rest of the gun, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So a difference of 1 part between the 2 of them field stripped. So when somebody says, oh, the SP10 Mag-10 is more complicated than the Gold Series, and that's why the Gold Series is superior, not really. In fact, there's a lot, like I said in the beginning of the video, there's a lot of advantages to the Mag-10 and SP10. To be honest, it's just 2 ways of building the wheel. So really, whatever you think you like more, whatever's more appropriate to your price point, I wouldn't worry about it either way. All I would say is that the Gold 10 is definitely easier to field strip, but it's not superior as far as parts go or how complicated the action is. So don't be intimidated by a Mag-10 or SP10. Guys who say that it's more complicated, really, I don't think they know what they're talking about, or they have a misconception of what being complicated is. Well, guys, final conclusions between these 2 shotguns. Really, and I've said it multiple times in this video, there is no true, you've made a bad decision by going with either one, whether that's the Mag-10, SP10 series of shotguns or the Gold 10. You really just have to decide if basically parts availability and capacity, as well as lighter weight, outweighs the intrinsic smoothness and just really pleasant shooting experience of the Mag-10 SP10 series. Anyways, guys, I hope this somewhat deep dive was informative to you. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. Give me a comment down below what you think and which one you might take if you had the option between either or, but only one. And until next time, guys, God bless. Keep your powder dry. I'll see you in the next video.